Okay, we're recording. I can use a beer.
Let me use a beer. A few drips of this.
Go for it. That actually smells really good.
It's too bad it's rough on the coils.
Rough on the coils. That's what we're worried about. We're worried about the coils.
It is important about the coils. Inductance, reactance, reluctance, resonant frequency, total diameter, mass, construction, material, electrical resistance. There's a lot of things that go into a coil, man. And that's not even talking about the core.
Let's introduce ourselves. This is
Jeremiah. I'm coming out of here from Milwaukee, checking out what Falcon Space has going on over the course of this week. And we have some pretty interesting stuff going on and a lot of material to work with, a surprisingly large amount of material to work with, actually.
Yeah, so we met through Jeremy Riss, who is one of the YouTubers very into this whole scene. He's more of a theorist, but a lot of people contact him, that are working on this on the periphery. And I tried to put the group together of people who are interested in anti-gravity to a point where they're willing to go and spend their own money and do experiments themselves and talk about it publicly. It's very important to me that people talk about it publicly because this technology needs to come out. I feel that very strongly. That's something that me and Jeremiah share. And
It's been a long time coming.
This
tech has been waiting and waiting and waiting, being privately developed, being suppressed systematically. It does offer a major threat to many economies, and I can understand why it's been suppressed. And I can understand also why it's so difficult, because this is extremely strange stuff. It's not found in your textbooks. It's not found anywhere that you're going to conventionally go for higher learning. But the fundamentals are there in all those locations, and there's a lot to learn first before you can start to dig into what's yet not known. And that's really the key. It's not so much that anybody is wrong, it's that there are many things yet not understood and not publicly known, which really should be for the greater good of all mankind.
Exactly. And one thing that can't be wrong is experiment. So me and Jeremiah's theory is don't go with you can have the theory, which is all good, but unless it leads to an experiment that falsifies it or proves it, you're really going nowhere and you're wasting your time.
Years are wasted in mathematics and theory with no experiments being capable of being done. Every so often they lead to a bit more understanding, but very seldom do these things directly translate into engineerable technologies. And what we really need right now are major changes and new propulsion technologies.
Oops. Oh, you continue. Go ahead.
You want to check it?
5 minutes left. I'm about to buy a power motor, guys. Maybe we should cut this part out.
It's kind of cool, actually.
Yeah, it's a
hell of a
machine.
motor.
Yeah. But anyways, we definitely need to be able to figure this stuff out. I don't see any reason why, with present technology, anti-gravity hasn't come about yet. And from everything that I've read, I found that this is the most disinformed area of science.
And one of the big reasons for exactly why that is because most of the fundamentals on which flying saucers or other types of unknown craft may in fact operate is not yet taught in public institutions because it's kind of on the fringe of science. Ideas like electromagnetic energy and its mass equivalency, well, you can produce mass with radio waves, and although it's right there in Einstein's equations, it's such a strange concept that most people really never consider the idea that energy traveling through a volume of space does in fact have an amount of mass that you can measure.
Now, one question that I had about that is, if you're putting in, let's say, how many watts is it to an atom?
How many watts to an atom? Not a convertible unit, unfortunately.
Okay, how many kilowatt hours
To an atom?
to an atom? An atom of
It has none, because kilowatt hours is measured in the motion of electric charges from one location to the other based on the difference in that electric potential. It's free electron slots in one material and extra electrons in the other. So it's not really the atoms, it's the motion of the charges.
Well, really everything is ultimately energy, but I'm trying to make a conversion between kilowatt hours and matter. And there is a conversion ratio. It involves the speed of light, that you figure out how much energy is in that atom. That's how nuclear weapons work.
You can figure out how much you can decompose the energy into, but I guess you could consider it in kilowatt hours. That's a good question.
So my consideration is, are we creating virtual mass there that is equal to the amount of mass it would have equaled? In that case, you would need megawatts, if not gigawatts, of power to even make a tiny amount of mass. And mass has almost
exactly what you're saying, and that's a great point. It's a great point to consider the actual amount of mass that an atom has versus the amount of total stored energy it would have if it were decomposed into its raw components. But the trick about what you're saying is the assumption that mass comes from that matter existing. And that's the real catch, is mass does not come from the fact that the matter exists. Mass comes from a different component of the matter, a different property of the matter itself, which you can simulate without the matter being present.
Okay, so we can simulate matter existing at that spot without providing the full amount of energy that would have needed to simulate that matter. So we could simulate it like the equivalent of a small planet, you're saying, with just a couple thousand watts?
Well, theoretically, it would be possible if you can cram it into a small enough area. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that it would inversely, by the square, drop off the same space as that very large planet, because it would be a point source. You would be really cramming a lot of energy into a small volume of space, and so naturally its total area would be much smaller, and the drop-off of those forces would be inversely proportional to the size and the shape of that field. Mm-hmm. But you could still create the same gravitational attraction in that source field as an entire planet would have on an object at that same distance.
Okay. I mean, to be honest, we can talk about this forever, but we really need to build an experiment and see exactly what is happening. And I think that's what David Perez is doing over at Space Warp Dynamics. I know they recently changed their name, but
now they're called Quantum Electrodynamics, which is an interesting change of direction. They haven't really written much about the quantum fields. David Perez is an interesting guy with an interesting project, and basically his theory states something on the lines of, if you cram enough electromagnetic energy with the correct phase conjugation into a given volume of three-dimensional space, when the waves of the electromagnetic energy interact, they will produce some kind of change in the volumetric space, the properties thereof. And in his case, you say that he is warping space, and if you theoretically compute what it would mean for a particle flowing through that same volume of space, it would effectively act like there's more space in that same space. So that particle would enter very quickly, it would slow down in that space, and then it would speed up when it exited. And so to that particle, it wouldn't really experience any change in its motion from its frame of reference, but from an external frame of reference, it would appear to slow down. So effectively, the particle, thinking that it was going the same speed, would have traversed a much farther distance in the focal point of these two EM fields that are interacting with each other. It's actually a phased array, so it's more than just two fields, but you get the drift. It's just electromagnetic energy being pumped by a radio transmitter of a very high energy level. And they're receiving pretty decent results in their lab, at least according to the reported data, which of course we have no way to validate independently, but it's worth looking at.
Yeah, and one thing I was thinking of trying for that experiment is, right now we have microwave capability because we're trying another experiment called dynamic nuclear orientation. Over here you can see the waveguide for that setup. The power supply and everything is in the lab right now. We just brought a couple pieces out. And basically what that is we're hitting a sample with a magnetic field. A magnetic field orients the electrons. That's basically what a magnetic field is, orientation of electrons. But electrons also have a Larmor precession. They spin around their axis, just like the Earth does every 25,000 years or so with the precession of the equinoxes. But for an electron that's spinning at the speed of light around an atom, which is a tiny space, the Larmor precession is way up in the gigahertz when provided with extremely powerful magnetic fields.
Which basically means the electrons orbiting around the nucleus of an atom will generally make that orbit several billion times a second. So there is a speed to it, and there is an amount of time.
I think it's an order of many trillions. What we're looking
Not
at
gigahertz.
No, we're looking at the Larmor precession.
Oh yeah,
it's
that's right.
Spinning
No,
a lot
you're
faster
correct.
than that.
You're correct. We're looking at the precessional rate as a result of the relativistic mass increase of its velocity trying to fall in towards the nucleus.
Exactly. Like Earth spins once every 24 hours, but it only precesses every 25,000 years. So whatever that ratio is, that's probably there's probably some sort of correlation between how fast electrons are spinning around the atom. So what we're trying to do is basically by hitting it at the Larmor precession, which is a precise number, we need to have very precise magnetic fields, which we created basically a massive electromagnet.
Yeah, we collaborated together online to figure out how to build this electromagnet. We based it on conventional NMR machines, which are very, very expensive. And they simply have two individual electromagnetic coils around a solid iron core. And in that case, it's two E-shapes. So there's a bar that comes down, and then there's two individual... Well, you can look up an NMR machine. Either way, what we can do is individually vary the field on the top and the bottom of the sample and increase the magnetic flux between the two cutoff points of the iron. So there are two cylinders, what are they, 2.5 inches in diameter?
Yeah, it's about 2.5 inches in diameter and about 1 inch tall.
So that's about the size of the sample that we can fit in there, minus the edge flux. We really want to get a laminar magnetic field, so we have a much smaller effective area between the two core halves, but we can vary that magnetic intensity. And just how much Gauss can you get out of that system?
It can go up to like almost half a Tesla right now. That's just based on my power supply. I could definitely put more copper in there and probably get a more powerful field, but it saturates the iron at around 4,000 Gauss, and we're doing most of our experiments at around 3,300, I think, 3,300 Gauss. And we have a Gauss meter, and we have a signal analyzer, and basically what we're trying to do is make sure that the RF that's coming in is oriented precisely. We're not talking about microwave RF where it's all random and you have a bit of a range of frequencies. We're talking about high precision gigahertz frequencies, the type of equipment that is used in sonar. Some of the pieces we have here are from NORAD, and professionals in this field are very hard to come by. I've looked around a lot. I found a couple people willing to help, but it's very difficult to find people who are in this field who have any interest in this stuff. Like Jeremiah mentioned before, anyone who goes to college is literally brought into this cult of believing that the things we're talking about are impossible. So nobody bothers trying, except for a select few in these top labs on a humongous budget. I'm doing this all on a very modest budget. Jeremiah is literally the king of taking a shoestring budget and cutting it in half and then finding the rest in the dumpster.
It works.
And it works. I mean, he freaking built this out of that. Look at this. Crazy powerful laser we just used to light our cigarettes. But right now what we're down to is we're trying to figure out what sort of combinations of materials we want to put in that chamber and measure their effect on the dynamic nuclear orientation. Because dynamic nuclear orientation is based on the electrons. Any atom that has a strong connection between the outer electrons, which we're controlling with our magnetic field, and the core, this is known as the hyperfine coupling, or the hyperfine...
Oh, this is your category, buddy. I'm learning.
A hyperfine interaction, yes. Anything that has a strong connection between a strong hyperfine connection between the outer electrons and the inner core will be oriented by dynamic nuclear orientation. Al Zafan, who proposed this theory, wrote a book on it. His son wrote a book on it. His dad wrote a paper. He was working for NASA at the time. Paper's called Anti-Gravity with Present Technology. And he basically laid out an experiment that we tried. We got some positive results from it. We didn't try it in its entirety yet. There's a couple more variations that we have to try. Basically, it says to use aluminum and a little bit of iron. I went all out since I got everything else, and the RF equipment was very hard to find. Some of it arrived broken, but eventually we got everything together. And we have all of these metal samples, and we're looking at you guys on helping out. If you know somebody who knows somebody who's ever done this stuff secret for the military, it's 2020, man. It's time for this information to come out. We got everything we need. We got a vacuum chamber. We're going to be mixing these powdered samples with epoxy. If anyone has any other recommendations, should we make super thin sheets? We have super thin sheets of aluminum that we tried, which we got positive results with. Got powdered aluminum. We got powdered tin, copper, bismuth. Bismuth is something very interesting because it's diamagnetic.
And that's what I was saying in the beginning of this video, is the amount of materials we have to work with is pretty significant, and this isn't anywhere near all of them. We have various oxides of some of these materials from earlier experiments in which they were heated. Oxides which have changed colors and may have changed their properties, which we have yet to test.
Actually, that's what this is. This is bismuth trioxide.
Yeah, and the other stuff that we had just from the bismuth oxides that we got out of the furnace, that was a pretty interesting material too. Came out of the furnace with a reddish color.
It came out with a reddish color because it was hot, but it cooled down into bismuth trioxide, which is that.
Oh, it's the same stuff, hey? That's pretty cool.
Yes, that is the same. That is the same.
There's a lot of various properties of materials that we have yet to discover that we could potentially discover in a controlled magnetic field with a controlled amount of radio energy pumped into these samples to see if those microwave band frequencies do have an ability to not only interact with the electrons, which of course we know that they do, but get them to oscillate in a way where they phase conjugate in unison instead of simply acting individually or only on the surface.
Yeah, if we're going to get an effect here, there's a couple different theories as to why it would work, but what I want to see in the lab is something that actually works. We have gotten positive results. It may have something to do with the way the microwaves are bouncing off the sample. I haven't been able to rule that out yet, but we have all of these samples. We're going to list them all in the description of this video, and if you know anything or know anybody who knows anything about this technology, feel free to comment in there. You can do it anonymously, and we'd really appreciate it. In fact, most of the best information I've ever come across has always been in the comments of my video, and I really want to thank everybody who's ever commented and who's really helped out. Anybody who's given a theory over that we thought was interesting. There's a lot of theories as to why this would work and different ways that it could possibly work, and I'm not going to call any of them busted or confirmed until we see it in the lab.
Absolutely, as Richard Feynman would say, if it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong. And it's absolutely been true so far. We've tested a lot of things which have had a lot of positive results, from YouTube to Twitter to older documents where people thought they had discovered something really phenomenal. And we've tested some of these apparatus and actually received positive results from them, but not for the reasons that some of the original discoverers thought. We were able to rule out various bad methodologies and find that when we had eliminated all the noise and all the other potential sources of signal contamination, that the experiments no longer worked. And we didn't change the experimental setup in any other ways than to eliminate out noise. So the same materials, the same samples, the same voltages, they simply don't work under certain conditions, and that tells us that it's probably measurement error. So we really need to focus on how we can start to test things scientifically with scrutiny, and even if none of them work as of yet, we need to keep on trying until we find something, because it's not going to happen on its own. And us out here in the public, we've got to do it.
Exactly. I think what's really going on here is there is an extraterrestrial treaty that dictates that this information needs to come out independently without any help. We've had other teams who have been hacked. I know we got a little bit of that as well. And we've had many people who've offered us money and never showed up. They're hanging around the periphery trying to see what the independents are doing. But ultimately, this needs to come out independently. It's probably because of some extraterrestrial treaty. It's logical that it is. I don't have any confirmation of that. But the fact that nobody's doing it out there leads me to believe that it must be done. And it can possibly lead to a real breakthrough in science.
I think that looking at some of the strange phenomena that we observed as a species is definitely one direction to go. And extraterrestrials may be one explanation. Our own government having all of this technology already may be another. But regardless of who has it or where it came from, the fact that it's being eyewitnessed by thousands of people across the globe on basically a monthly basis, and now finally after a very long time it's being videotaped because people have cell phones on their cameras, and most first world countries and third world countries and second world countries are slowly getting technology wherein they can actually record events too. So we're going to begin to see some of this stuff from all over the globe in places that we've never seen it before. And there's a lot of tech out there and things flying in the sky that are not airplanes, that are not balloons, that are not satellites, that are not birds. There are objects that can move in ways that nothing publicly acknowledged, at least, can move. And it's about time that we start to really seriously get some answers to how these things work. Whatever they are, whoever built them, we need to find out. And anything that we can do, we will do in an attempt to try to discover how they work.
Yes. So Jeremiah sort of went down the path of high voltage electricity. That's where his background was. They know him as the Tesla coil guy. That's how Jeremy introduced him to me. But he definitely has a very open mind. I have tried some of the high voltage, DC experiments myself. Actually, I have a 125,000 volt power supply that Jeremiah helped me repair. And we tried an experiment the other day that was sent in from Vietnam, where they were getting positive results. We set it up and we got negative results, and we tried to explain why. I think it has to do with the feed wires. We're dealing with high voltages. There's a lot of different air currents that are involved. We now have the opportunity to actually try ionic experiments in a vacuum chamber, because when we received the vacuum chamber, we noticed that the port where the vacuum chamber enters is actually a piece of metal surrounded by a very large dielectric. So we basically have the possibility of setting up a circuit there.
Yeah, so I've done some electron experiments in vacuum chambers too, and I've also used my same inlet ports. It works very well, in fact. I tend to use copper or brass fittings with hose adapters. You can get them if you special order them. McMaster-Carr, I believe, carries them, or you can get them on eBay. But yeah, you can get some pretty decent low resistance materials that you can just connect hoses to and jam huge amounts of current in them into a vacuum chamber. The trouble with that is, unless your vacuum chamber has latches, as soon as you get electron pressure inside that thing, those electrons will stick to the inside walls of the chamber more quickly than they can dissipate it, and the pressure inside the chamber will build to the extent that it will break the vacuum and push the seal off unless it's clamped down. So that's one of the things that I've had happen already in vacuum chambers. Strange things happen with electrons in vacuum. That much I can tell you. Especially when you get into incredibly high energy densities.
So if we stuck a capacitor in there with a very high energy density,
and discharged it, yeah.
And discharged it, you say that...
You may actually blow out the top of that thing, though. Even if you can pull as hard of a vacuum as you can, you don't have a third stage or fourth stage pump to get the rest of the air out, which you would almost have to have a 1-inch, 2-inch hose.
Yeah, but that's not ion wind at that point.
No, I mean, there's no... Talking about ions in a vacuum chamber is a good NASA test, and that we can do. But what we're really looking for are those weird phenomena that
the stuff
NASA can't do.
Or they have done and
haven't said anything about, right?
Or haven't said anything about publicly and went and sent it all off to the smelter. And I've seen some evidence that is the case.
It's really not that different from back in the day when the carriage makers went out of business with the introduction of the automobile. it's not that carriages were no longer useful or that they didn't work as good as they used to. They were exactly the same as they'd always been.
Actually,
It's
I'd
just that they were
argue
replaced by a better technology, and there's no reason that rockets can't go the same way.
I'd actually argue that the carriages of the 19th century were probably the best carriages ever made.
Well,
Unless you
absolutely they were, because
let's go to the
they were
Mormons.
used daily by people who had money, and they were built with passion through many generations of experience building that stuff. It was the best of the best up until they became virtually useless.
Exactly.
And then, unfortunately, those skills probably went the wayside, like a great many things in history that we've lost. People forget about Steinmetz. People forget about Heaviside. People forget about all kinds of great names who have put out books and information which doesn't agree necessarily with the conventional curriculum.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that in history. I thought some of the carriage makers actually went on to make some automobiles. That's where some of the automakers started.
That would certainly make sense.
Because they have most of the technology already. They're the best at shocks. They're the best at carriage building. It's basically a carriage with just an integrated horse.
But, I mean, the point in place is the rocket engineers are probably going to be the best people equipped to help an alternative technology that gets discovered get into space, just like the carriage builders were the best people equipped to make wheels for vehicles that now can power themselves without a horse. But now when you replace the rocket motor with a different system that doesn't require it, those same people still know how to make a livable environment in space. They still understand how to filter and reuse materials. They understand what can shield against radiation. You know, they know quite a lot that we really need to know. All of those things are just as relevant, but we're not going to get there by burning hydrocarbons.
Yeah, that's a totally different topic, though. The energy requirements of such a craft are yet to be known. I'm hopeful that we could do it on hydrogen fuel cells alone, which would be perfect, because you'd literally just land on a planet, fill up with oxygen and hydrogen, and if you get stuck, you still have water as a byproduct.
Yeah, that is nice. You can break water down into a lot of different types of propulsion systems. You can break it down for its energy component or store it as different gases.
And you can drink it. It's a very useful thing to have.
Yes.
And if you actually have a machine that can take the carbon dioxide out of the air and turn it back into a hydrocarbon,
Right, combine the carbon with the air into an oxygen and
into a hydrocarbon,
hydrogen,
then you'll basically be feeding people, machine-made food like the manna that was served in the desert. That's probably what it was. It was just food coming out of the carbon dioxide in the air. But these are all ancillary technologies that may have already been discovered. I actually read a paper that the manna machine has already been discovered. Somebody wrote a book on it. It's not really my area of expertise. What I'm really concentrating on over here is trying to figure out what technology works, why does it work, and how can we make a usable craft out of it.
yeah, and in order to do that, we're basically testing anything and everything. We don't have a theory that we prescribe to, or a thing that we think is absolutely right, or some kind of path that must be followed in order to get to where we want to go. We're literally willing to test just about anything, so long as it's back with enough data to be tested, an experimental method that actually allows it to be put into the lab.
And most importantly, it needs to be available. Don't ask for any element 115 shit or any, superconductors that will take, months to arrive from China
Germany or anywhere else that makes superconductors.
Right. We want stuff that are available right here. In the description of this video, we'll put in all of the materials, and we'll ask you guys, literally, why you think this material over that material should be included in the test, and what combinations should we have. Bismuth has going for it the diamagnetism. Do we want the bismuth trioxide though? I don't know. We have pure bismuth as well. We also have bismuth plate over here. We have iron in several different forms. We have it atomized, granular. We have sheets of iron that are extremely thin, which is pretty cool to play with. You have all different types of aluminum.
Yeah, that stuff is surprisingly magnetic, considering how thin it is.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing stuff. We have Niobium oxide, tin powder. This is vanadium oxide. The reason why we're going with powders is because of something called the skin depth effect, where the RF at such a high frequency doesn't penetrate deep into a sample. So we're going for like tiny micron, 10, 20 micron size particles and suspending them inside an epoxy, which we have over here. And we're going to put that in the vacuum chamber in order to air it out to get all the bubbles out. And let it sit overnight, and then we're going to be testing all of these possibilities hopefully later this week. And anybody who can give us any suggestions, we'd really like to hear it from you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Any input at all. Particularly what we're looking for is when we slam about, 20 watts or so?
20 watts is what we have available for the RF.
When we slam about 20 watts of RF energy that we can set our frequency for in the gig range for any of these materials, we're going to put them under a strong magnetic field, a laminar magnetic field, and at a polarized axis to that magnetic field, we're going to inject microwave band radio waves, which should oscillate the electrons contained in these materials and should allow them to precess to some extent. So we're wondering what you think might have the greatest effects under the influence of the microwave band RF that's striking these samples.
Another thing that Alzafan mentioned is it's worth it to include iron or any ferromagnetic material in the mix, just a tiny bit of it, because that allows the magnetic field lines to permeate the material better. This theory, by the way, can explain the shape of UFOs. What we're doing is more like a lab experiment. Nothing that we do is actually applicable to an actual craft. We would literally turn the craft inside out. So instead of having a magnet, that with iron that goes around to a center core, we would actually just build a humongous magnet that is the entire craft, and then we build the craft's lines, its hull, around the magnetic field, so it gets a laminar magnetic field on all hull points.
And effectively, this magnet isn't some magical magnets make things float thing. This magnet is only there to line up the electron valence spins of the materials the craft is made of. And in doing so, should allow us to excite the material of the craft itself in a way that causes it to either lose mass or potentially even have a negative mass, effectively against the gravitational field.
Actually, there's if you want to get into theory, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why they say it would work.
Indeed, there is. But
yeah,
if we can test it with what we have, that's.
I met some teams that are like so positive about their theory that they, they're really serious about their theory, to put it simply. But I have my theory. Alzvan had his theory, and they have their theory, and everyone can have their own theory. I don't really care. What really matters is what happens in the lab, and that is something that me and Jeremiah agree on strongly, is that science should be forwarded with experiment, not with theory. You can theorize all day long, but if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And we have all the equipment here in the lab to set this up, and hopefully anybody who can chime in on this can really help us out and get to the bottom of dynamic nuclear orientation.
Well, thanks, folks. We really hope to hear back from you. Please leave a comment.
Yes, please leave a comment, and please share this with anybody you know that can possibly help. If it's money, that's always helpful, but what we really seen more important than money is knowledge. If somebody has real, actual knowledge, not disinformation, there's so much disinformation out there, it's just like throwing shit at us. If you know what you're talking about, post in the comments, and we could really use your help. If you're in the New Jersey area, we'd be glad to have you down in the lab. We are open source, and we probably have SSP spies that come in here all the time. And I have no fucking problem with that, because ultimately this technology needs to come out, and I think they believe that as well. If they had a problem with me doing all these experiments, I'd be dead long ago.
No, you've said too much. It's all over now.
Oh no, you're going to pull out the gun?
The conspiracy is getting too thick. Can no longer wade through the sludge. I don't know about my opinion and all that stuff, but I do know that I'm here for the science. and we're going to do a hell of a lot of it. It's been good science so far. It's been good science that's disproved stuff that we thought might work. And now we know that it doesn't, so we're not going to waste our time with it anymore. We're moving on to other things.
Or stuff that did work and we figured out why.
That also.
Yeah, there was a lot of false positives that we... yeah, go for it.
Awesome.
We had a couple of false positives as well, and the false positives are just as exciting. I mean, read our slogan, advancing anti-gravity technology, and the way you advance anti-gravity technology is by fail forward. Like Wayne Ojala's YouTube channel, he's another guy, friend of ours up in Canada, who's doing Alzaphan as well. He also got positive results, but his equipment isn't as up to date as ours.
Wayne has found a way to take basically
the shoestring
regular stuff and do incredibly advanced, very expensive experiments with it in a manner of speaking. And he's actually received some results with that. Even he's not sure whether or not those results are possibly including a large amount of measurement error, and looking at his setup, it's virtually impossible to tell as well. But the fact that he's trying pretty much says everything about what we need to be doing. Some of these things were discovered by somebody at some point in history. These craft that are flying around today, they were built by somebody, and whoever that was, they obviously discovered, well, something about physics that we don't know.
Yes, there's definitely another force in nature that we don't yet understand. It needs to be discovered. One theory is that orienting the subatomic particles somehow changes their inertial frame. Like maybe matter is incoherent, it's spinning in all directions, and therefore every time you move it, you're moving it through some sort of etheric field, and that changes its Larmor precession or whatever, and that's how you have kinetic energy. Another theory is that maybe just like magnetism, there's some parameter to Earth because it's spinning that we can latch onto and spin with that and push against the planet or attract to the planet.
A great many patents have been released on specifically just dealing with the idea that you'd be flung off the surface of the Earth if not for the influence of gravity. So they focus on not producing gravity or simulating gravity, but simply nullifying out the ability of it to interact with matter. And in these patents are claimed that the craft will simply lift off the ground as a result of the Earth's rotation, flying out.
Oh, that's crazy. Maybe that's why they shake so much, because, if an advanced civilization has the technology to fly all the way here, why are they shaking around so much?
Well, maybe the ones that shake so much aren't from an advanced civilization. Maybe none of them are. But maybe they shake so much because they were prototypes built by somebody who discovered something interesting, just like we might do.
I don't think so. I think it has something to do with the effect. The truth of the matter is the really large craft haven't been seen doing that. Like the triangle craft usually don't shake around so much. It's usually the round ones that do.
Yeah, but conventional conspiracy would say that those are definitely mankind-built craft, and they're mostly not unconventional or false.
If it's mankind-built craft, then somebody watching this video probably knows somebody who actually worked on it.
That's who I want to talk to. Whoever happens to have any kind of... My buddy told me once at a bar about this really phenomenal thing, and this is going to sound weird, but let me tell you guys, that's what we want to hear. Tell us about that weird story, about the information that you have that just... You haven't really shared all that commonly because it's not generally a conversation piece. We want to hear about it. We do want to talk to you about that stuff. Well, listen. Anything that you have that you think may be a technological possibility, if you have some kind of reasonable suspicion or evidence to back it up, let us know.
Yeah, and please, if you're trying to feed us disinformation or bullshit, or please do not comment if you're trying to do that, because we have had a lot of that as well. But we're pretty good at sifting out the bullshit from the real stuff, I think. At this point, we do have a pretty good understanding of high voltage electrostatics, mostly Jeremiah's expertise. Dynamic nuclear orientation is definitely something very new to us. This is the first time we're really trying it.
I'm sure we're getting a lot of stuff wrong, which is why we're asking you for input.
And I actually got a book on dynamic nuclear orientation of high-spin polymers or something like that, and I got all excited to read it, and I started reading it, and I realized most of the book was talking about how to make different radioactive forms of gold. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why they're so obsessed with gold. I don't see anything special about gold. The craft are definitely not made out of gold.
Well, we're not sure about that, but
we're pretty sure about that. There's never been a gold.
It might not look gold, but it can be made of gold.
Oh, that's true. It could be mixed in there. Something that I thought that was very important. I spoke to David Alzafan, the guy who actually wrote the book, and he told me he was pretty disheartened because he hasn't found anybody who's actually doing it, and answers his email only like after 6 months or something like that. But he's a really cool guy, and we shared some thoughts and experiences. And he had this idea that I actually had as well. Linda Moulton Howe claims to have this sample of a crashed UFO, and it was made out of bismuth and magnesium. And I think there was another element like tin in there or something like that. So we're thinking of mixing bismuth and magnesium, into one of the samples. We'll put a little bit less magnesium because we don't want the electromagnet to get too excited about it and move our sample, and we'll have to deal with that issue as well. There's like a saddle point where we'll have to put the sample in order to make sure we're getting accurate measurements. We're very good at getting accurate measurements. But it was interesting that he had the exact same idea as me, and that's really what we want. We want to find out what elements on the periodic chart will possibly lend themselves well to a strong hyperfine interaction, and how that will affect the sample, and how that will affect the overall craft, and how that can affect dynamic nuclear orientation. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is dynamic nuclear orientation. We're not really sure what's going to happen. In a nutshell, dynamic nuclear orientation is basically coherent matter. We're taking incoherent matter, making it coherent. Just like white light is incoherent light because it's going out in all directions, then you have a laser pointer, which is coherent light. It's going in just one direction at one frequency. So if we can make the entire craft into coherent matter, then maybe we can detach it from space-time somehow, or I really don't know what it will do. And I also believe there's probably more than one effect. So I don't set my my money on any one experiment. We are trying the high voltage experiments as well, and there's one experiment we're pretty excited for. We need a press for that, actually, in order to press together some barium titanate to make a capacitor with enough energy density to really pack a punch. So we have a high voltage capacitor that's going to discharge into this low voltage parallel plate capacitor, and we're hoping that will be some sort of effect similar to the pod clamp experiment, which may explain the base of the ARV. It sort of looked like a gigantic capacitor. And
it's basically a stacked capacitor array with, there's two different versions of it. There's Mark McCandlish's official drawing, and then there's also a very popular drawing. Maybe it's an interpretation. I don't believe it's by McCandlish himself, which shows the plates staggered on top of each other. So instead of the plates being lined up in even stacks, it shows them interposed on each other. So every other layer, basically just like that old, what is that thing called? The gravity capacitor.
Oh, the gravitator?
Well, not Thomas Townsend's gravitator, but there was this device that Bill Beattie put out online in the AOL days that talks about, and I'm sure it didn't come from him, it's been floating around there. He's one of the guys that did his due diligence in researching it, and researched it quite a bit, he did. And so it's an array of plates, 9 plates per layer of tin foil, not aluminum foil, stacked on top of each other and connected with strips, little segments, and then these plates, each plate for one layer, 2 plates next to each other, there'd be a third plate that sits in that position exactly between them on the top layer, and then they all go around, so 9 plates per layer. Anyway, so supposedly this device, when you electrified it with high voltage electricity, would produce a gravitational force upwards of several pounds, and in some cases was more powerful than the amount of weight of the device, so it would lift itself up off the table and if you let it go, cause some damage. But it's not that dissimilar from that gravity capacitor. I think it was called originally the electric rocket. That would be the search term to look into.
Oh, very interesting. I haven't heard of this experiment yet. We literally just met a couple days ago in person for the first time.
Yeah, in person. We've been talking online and designing things for these experiments for quite some time. I actually have no idea how long it's been.
We could ask Jeremy Riss when he introduced us, but literally we're down here trying to do all these experiments. We just met up and we're having a blast of it, like literally getting no sleep. That's why we
literally getting no sleep. I'm running on like
3
5
hours
hours of sleep from like 3 hours. What was it? Yeah, that's right. 3 hours of sleep from last night versus 4 hours of sleep from the previous night, and that's following a day of having gotten not that much sleep plus jet lag coming in. So it's like, not that jet lag is really a thing to worry about, but yeah, it is a change in pace for your brain to suddenly adapt to a new environment. That's a mental drain.
And if anyone out there has some serious money who wants to fund this stuff,
we'll do the experiments.
We'll do the experiments. We would love the funding, but really, what we really need is we need somebody to run a company. We're not interested in running a company. I've done it for 8 years already. I run a business with hybrid batteries. It's called Falcon Hybrid, and that's actually where we are right now. And I really prefer working on the equipment and working on the experiments, because that's where my passion is and that's where I want to go. So if any of you know somebody who can help us out in any way and put together a company properly so that we can get investors, and offer them real equity in something that they can believe in, that would be amazing. This Waveguide was actually donated by a guy, Carl Miller. He's one of my few investors. But I really appreciate overall is people who put in their time, because when you put in your time, you're putting in true money. Money is just a number. Putting in time is the only currency you truly have. And there's so much good that can be caused in this world just by anti-gravity disclosure, not to mention mining the asteroid belts and colonizing Mars if you want to. I look at Mars as sort of like going to Antarctica. It's like,
I got no opinion. I ain't been there yet, but hope to be someday.
I have not been to Mars either, but like, why in the world would you want to go to Mars and live? It's sort of like going.
I don't know about going there to live, but I certainly want to check the place out.
Yeah, it'll be
see what the terrain's like.
Yeah, it'll be a visit. It wouldn't be like I don't see us colonizing the place.
Well, if you can get to Mars in a reasonable short period of time, why stop there?
Really, what this is going to change is it's going to get rid of the airline industry. Airplanes are going out of business. Airplanes are the horse and buggy that we're putting out of business. Open pit mining, that's going to go out of business. The fossil fuel industry, I'm not so sure, because none of this over here has anything to do with energy production. This is all energy expansion technologies to create different propulsion.
As far as we can theorize about it, I mean, there are potentials in which you could violate the second law of thermodynamics, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other day.
I'm not so sure about that, but those devices are really not my area of expertise, and I don't like to theorize on them. I just like to concentrate on what I know, and that's that flying saucers are real, anti-gravity, or something that people call it warp drive, gravity cancellation, inertial mass shielding, gravity shielding, so many different names to basically give over the exact same effect, which is flying at 10,000 miles an hour and doing a 90-degree turn, like so many pilots have seen before. The Pentagon already admitted it's real, and the guy, what's his name, the pilot who was flying during the Nimitz encounter, he's been on Joe Rogan, he's been on CNN, Fox News, been on every single news network saying, yeah, these are extraterrestrial craft, or they're very advanced, way more advanced than our F-35s. So those are the kind of companies that are going out of business. Is whoever's making those F-35s, and the big airline companies, Boeing and Airbus, they're the ones who are probably going to lose out the most if they don't get on board quickly. Because
my guess is they're already on board if it exists, and we won't know about it until it becomes public. and then we will.
Oh, maybe they'll hire us.
Maybe they will.
I have no problem working for a company as long as they're actually have their heart in the right place.
I work for perks, if they're really good. But I got my limits.
What I would like to set up is like a nice lab with a housing set up nearby, so that we could just be close to the lab and not have to work these crazy hours. And attack anti-gravity from all different directions.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a team of people actually working on various things instead of, one experiment every week or every month.
Yeah, and a lot of the equipment, crosses over. Any weight change device that you have, any scales or, RF detectors, or a lot of the equipment crosses over. And having one big lab that does it all is really very important.
It is.
And being able to detect everything and quantify it precisely is...
You need a very wide skill base and a very wide variety of equipment to check for all possible errors. I mean, we are literally looking for something that's outside the scope of generally understood physics, and unless there are other terms that we don't know about, we need a pretty wide scope of capabilities in order to test some of these things.
Right, and also...
And any lab wouldn't.
Also, if you want to join the team, reach out. We're always looking for new members. We really don't care about your PhD and whatever. It's nice to have. It shows that you've done, some serious stuff before, but it also means that you've been indoctrinated with the current...
I wouldn't say that. It's a nice starting point.
It's a nice starting point. Okay, well, we'll put it that way. It's a nice starting point.
It's just that there's more other than taught in college. That's it.
You got to really approach it with an open mind, because what they make you think in college is that this stuff is impossible and we're crackpots. And I totally disagree. And if we're not pushing the edges of science, then we're not really scientists. And when I was at AlienCon, I actually had an interesting experience. We set up a booth there, and I had to go in covertly because I've been denied a booth at several different conferences already. There's a lot to talk about there. But I set up a booth. I came down there with Jeremy Riss. I actually convinced him to fly out for a weekend, and now my ex-wife. And we were there, set up a booth. It was originally named 1988 because I just stuck in some random name, because in the past I've been denied for talking about anti-gravity. I've been denied a booth at 2 separate conferences. So we just came in there undercover, set up a booth and started talking about anti-gravity, and the people we met were just out of this world interactions. And one interaction that really stuck out was I went to the main hall. I wanted to ask the panel. It was a big panel where most of the presenters were going to be congregated. And I went in at the last moment for the Q&A, and I was wearing my big lab coat. It said Falcon Space on it, the logo and everything, and I was waiting in line to ask the question. Lady in front of me was blabbing on about demons and all bullshit, and I was like, fuck this. And it came my turn to ask a question, and they shut down the panel. And I think they shut it down purposefully. The lady that came forward was one of the managers, and they looked pretty concerned that I was coming up to ask a question. The people in the panel noticed this as well, and they actually came to the edge of the stage and talked to me one-on-one. And I asked them, I explained to them what I was doing, anti-gravity research, and I spoke to them on their way out. They have a separate exit to leave the hall. And I asked one of the guys about alzaphan and dynamic nuclear orientation, and the guy said, I actually worked on that for the military. The results are classified.
It's a pretty good thing for me to look into that, yeah.
Yeah.
If it's classified, I probably want to know about it.
Exactly. If there's something really there to the level that they classified it,
it's
then,
obviously worth being classified. That's definitely gotta have it for me.
Gotta have it for the planet, not just for us. I would love to fly flying saucer. It's my dream.
Keep on trying at it. Something's got to work eventually, or
Everything-
you'll die trying, and you'll have done your very best. One way or the other, we're gonna do everything that we can to get closer.
One thing I've noticed in my life is that most of my obsessions have always been around trying to replicate the experience of flying in a flying saucer. Like, I got into remote control airplanes for the sole purpose of doing it FPV, first person view with goggles on, and you can look around inside the airplane. I actually built a whole remote control airplane just to do that. The next thing I got really into was power motor, which is an ultralight airplane. Basically, it's a kite over your head, and you have this huge motor on your back that pushes you around. Flying super slow, it's really cool, very loud, and it's a lot of fun, but it's not the real thing. It's not real anti-gravity. And the final thing that I got really addicted to, and this was a problem, was I got introduced to this game called Elite Dangerous.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Well, I will introduce you to Elite Dangerous, but I'm not going to let you play it all night because there's a problem. It's basically a flying saucer simulator.
Interesting.
And I got the first-person view goggles. I got the Oculus with the controllers to match up the craft. And I was literally flying around the universe. Actually, it's a one-on-one copy of the Milky Way galaxy. So you're literally flying to stars that we see in the night sky. And, you know, they just threw in whatever planets they thought were going to be there and which ones are habitable. And you can land on bases and you get missions and you can shoot other craft. It's a whole, you know, I'm not so sure the science is right and there's thrusters, but just the experience of flying around, you know.
Yep, right there with you.
First person view, when you have the controllers and everything, was so freaking cool. It was addictive. It was fucking addictive. But once I realized why I was addicted to it, I was like, fuck this, I don't need it anymore. I need to go actually build the stuff and, you know, start a business, because this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Could be. If it works.
If any of this works, we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry. If you want to get in on that, it'll probably be the best investment in your life. I can't promise you that, but I truly believe that this is the best investment anybody can make, is anti-gravity technology. Pushing the boundaries. It's going to be world-changing, and it's going to be amazing. I'm really excited, and I love the experiments.
It's already
too.
amazing. We've seen it fly. It's already amazing. We just need to get our hands on it.
Exactly.
Our species needs to have this, and we need it desperately, like a long time ago.
We definitely need it. And if anybody's out there who can help us, who has any little bit of information, you know, send a donation. Anything you can do to help out will be really appreciated. And trust me, any penny that you send us will do much more good for science than any other grant that you can donate to. We're actually going to be using the money toward actual equipment, supplies, materials. I haven't taken a salary for this. Jeremiah is not taking a salary for this. He actually came down here to help me with the hybrid battery business.
Yep, and we're here to do the experiments in our spare time, because business still has to happen as usual and things need to get done. So everything that we put into this has been a labor of love. It's not been funded. It's not been given to us. We had to put in the time and the effort to learn what we needed to learn new topics of science that we had previously never even known about. I've been doing it for 21 years now. You've been doing it for a while too.
Not that long. I'll just get into how I got into this. So I grew up Orthodox Jewish family. I was the ninth out of 11 kids. And we grew up in Lakewood, New Jersey. My parents are what you call Baal Tshuva, meaning that they were barely affiliated with Judaism and got onto the Orthodox train during the hippie years of the 60s. And sure, go for it.
Thanks.
and they moved to Lakewood, New Jersey, which is basically the Jewish center here in America. And it's September 11th, a decision was made that we're going to move to Israel. And I was 13 at the time, moved to Israel. So I experienced Judaism from both angles, both from Lakewood, New Jersey, and from the old city. And I went through several different schools related to Jewish study. They're called yeshivas, and I really had zero background in science. Everything that I learned in science was completely self-taught. I learned from books, and when I was in yeshiva, I was learning, string theory during the break, because that's really what interested me. I wanted to delve deeper into the mysteries of the universe, and I got to a certain point in my Jewish career where I basically ended up lecturing one of the Gedolei Adar, which is like one of the leaders of the Jewish Orthodox world, on one of the hardest sections of the Gemara, which is the Talmud. And after I did that, and it was a success, I sort of took a step back from Judaism, started analyzing it from another perspective, and the conclusion I came to is that Judaism has nothing to do with God. I mean, God is not mentioned in the Bible once. I'm talking about the Old Testament. It talks about a guy named Jehovah and the Elohim. The Elohim seems to be a group of extraterrestrials that created man, and Jehovah seems to be a singular extraterrestrial that was involved with the Exodus. So the Exodus did happen. The pillar of fire and smoke was an anti-gravity craft, and Jews are basically in spiritual slavery. That was my conclusion out of it. I tried sharing this with some friends of mine, many Jews, and some of them accepted it, some of them just laughed it off, but ultimately they all pushed me in the same direction and said, make it work. If it works, we're on board with you. And I kind of agree with that. I'm not asking anybody to go throw away their, hard fought for religious beliefs, but I think if somebody was around at that time with the technology to split the sea and feed them this carbohydrate called manna for 40 years, I think he would be worshipped pretty much. And I can understand where the cult started from, but it's basically just an alien cargo cult. And the next question was, so how do these craft work? How did he split the sea? And that's where I started reading every book I could possibly find on the subject, and I realized quickly there was a lot of disinformation in this field. If you want to get into the Kennedy assassination, or if you want to go into 9/11 truthers, like Jeremy Riss is very into that, you'll find there's a little bit of disinformation, and there's a lot of just people screaming that they know the truth and whatever. As you get closer to anti-gravity, there's more and more disinformation being thrown around. There's patents being filed. There's theories being written by prestigious people and peer-reviewed. Not everything you read is real. Most of it's fake. And once I realized that there is a cover-up going on, I just delved deeper and deeper, and I learned more from the comments on videos that I made than I did from the video itself. In fact, many of my theories, before proved to be wrong, and I'm perfectly okay with that because I'm right now, because this is what we're trying, and until the experiment says left or right, that's where I'm going to go. And this is basically the best way forward, in my opinion, is to try all these experiments and ultimately see what the results are and build that flying saucer that fooled the Jews into thinking Jehovah was something special. And I think having that realization will be akin to the rapture. I mean, what do Christians really believe about the rapture? That they're going to be taken up, right?
I am not sure what they really believe, because I've heard a lot of different ideas on it.
But ultimately, they
believe in the idea of salvation, that's for sure. There is some kind of salvation in which they get saved from the rapture and the epoch and all that stuff, so they don't have to suffer. I don't know about that, but that's not the only religion that contains that type of promise.
Okay, so what if we're talking about an event, like a solar flare that damages Earth pretty bad, or massive earthquakes, or whatever it is,
or an asteroid,
that comes and hit, and that's coming in to hit us, and we need to get off this planet real fast. And this is the way to do it. I mean, rockets are not going to get us into space. Elon Musk is pretty clear about that as well. He could maybe put 100 people on Mars in 8 years. If this technology, if we have an experiment here that proves dynamic nuclear orientation in some form or fashion with different mixes of metals, actually creates some sort of effect that can negate gravity, do any of these things that we colloquially call anti-gravity, the need for rockets will be thrown out the window because they are extremely inefficient.
Indeed, all this stuff has to do with how to make a force without a propellant. And that's a
reactionless force.
A reactionless force, and that is a very taboo topic amongst physicists in colleges and just about anywhere of higher education. The idea of reactionless propulsion that violates so many conventions of laws that apply most of the time, but don't necessarily apply under all circumstances. I mean, talk about the laws of physics in the quantum community, and they're going to tell you flat out that they simply don't apply on that scale. That those laws are, in fact, by some opinions of people in quantum physics, composed of the motions of the particles that the universe is made up of. So you can get a lot of different opinions on what is factual and what is not, but the point is that if it's written in a book, it does not mean that it's right under all circumstances. It means that it was most likely right under some set of circumstances based on some predisposition and a few assumptions unmentioned. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, also attacking experiment with theory first. I have a little bit of a problem with that. Is because you assume that if the experiment is successful, that your theory was correct. Doesn't necessarily correlate all of the time.
And if you have a good scientific method, you'll eventually figure out that, well, your theory may have been correct about one of the predictions, but it wasn't correct in its original core assumptions. So if you keep on with good scientific method, you'll figure out where you made the errors and also what works, so you can keep on going. But there is the tendency, and I understand what you're saying, for the dogma of keeping with one's own idea, because that investor's fallacy that you've spent time and energy working on something and you must prove that all that time and energy was valid and that it proves itself out to be that you are correct. The ego gets in the way.
Exactly. Yeah, you just knocked it on the head. The ego is the destruction of all science, and really we see that a lot in science. It's a very sad situation where, the Searle effect generator, for example, there's so much money has been spent on that, and I've never seen an iota of evidence that the shit works. I mean, it
generates power as exactly as you would by any other generator, only much more cumbersome and a lot more unnecessary parts to do so, but it certainly doesn't seem to, in any of the models that I've seen at least, generate unknown force of any sort. It doesn't seem to have the electron pumping effect either. So there's a lot to be seen yet, and there's a lot of claims out there that don't prove out in the lab when you really test them with scrutiny and proper method. So it's unfortunate, but what it does tell us is what not to waste our time and effort on, and we have a pretty long list of stuff that's given us a good idea not what to spend time on, and now where we can begin to look on things that actually have produced results.
Yeah, exactly. We have to look at the things that have the potential to produce results, try the experiments out, and share them with the world. And that is our mission. If you want to get involved, like this video, share it with somebody who cares, and hopefully we'll
get somewhere with this stuff.
We'll actually get somewhere with this stuff. Yeah, we'll advance anti-gravity technology to the point where it's no longer deniable. We're
going to try our damnedest anyways, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think the truest form of disclosure is anti-gravity disclosure. I mean, we already had the Pentagon coming out and saying it's real, and we had all those ex-NORAD officials and military officials said, I ran the silo and it was there, and it was flying, and all the nuclear weapons went into no-fly modes, and so on and so forth. but nobody really gives a shit about that because it's not really, relatable to their life. This stuff is. This is the part that is relatable to your life. We want to make anti-gravity real. If you share this passion with us, contact us. Help us out. Make it happen. It's really sad that it's come to this, that I feel there's so few people around the world that are so passionately interested in it that they'll actually, devote time to it. It's a really sad situation, and if this technology is real, it should be investigated. I literally haven't seen anybody who's done this dynamic nuclear orientation, setup and hasn't seen some sort of result. Something's definitely going on.
Well, I think the key here is it's not whether or not it is or is not real. It's real. We're doing it. It's been tested and it's been done. It's whether or not it operates by mechanisms that we can understand well enough to do something useful with it.
Right, and if we can up the effect as well. And if you need like a megawatt in order to lift a pound, that's kind of useless. If you need, on the order of, let's say, 100 watts or even 5 watts to lift a pound, then, maybe there's something to talk about. Also, are we lifting a pound? Maybe we're just shielding it. We really don't know what the power requirements are.
As far as we're concerned, if it takes 5 watts to make something weightless, it doesn't really matter how much energy it might take to lift it. If it's virtually weightless, if we can make a 1 kilogram object weigh 1 gram, energy doesn't really matter at that point. What matters is how much energy it took to make it weigh 1 gram or to make it weigh nothing at all.
Another question I had that's will only be answered through experiment is the energy input equal to the potential energy gained by the craft rising minus inefficiencies? Or is there a way to pull energy out of the 0-point field using this effect? A perpetual motion machine, basically.
Lots of different approaches in that category.
I don't believe in perpetual motion machines. I'm a believer in Billy Meyer, and he talked about visiting an extraterrestrial planet in the Pleiades. And he said the planet was not powered by nuclear. They were sick of nuclear. It's too dangerous. And they literally just chose a planet that had good geothermal connections and set up power stations. And that's the safest, cleanest way to obtain energy. And it seems like the craft run on batteries of some sort or hydrogen fuel cells of some sort. I also don't believe in the tiny nuclear reactor that Bob Lazar was talking about with element 115.
No, I mean the idea that it could work is totally separate from the idea that the elements that he specifically stated would work.
Because something that's very interesting about element 115 that people don't realize, element 115 is where is it? Unpentium, right there. UUP is right below bismuth. The next one in its family is bismuth, and we're pretty excited about trying bismuth in our experiments because it's the strongest diamagnetic material. Also, it's been found in Linda Moulton Howe's sample that she claimed came from UFOs. So, if there's something I'm pretty excited about, bismuth. Bismuth has a pretty high spin ratio, which may be related. That's the spin of the inner electrons and whatever. Niobium also has a high spin coefficient, and so does vanadium. So we got several different powders. And we're using powders because of the skin depth effect. Have these high spin, effects, and can possibly latch on to whatever we're trying to do. I'm intentionally using very vague language here because I really don't know what's going to happen. We have a couple theories, but we really don't know ultimately what is going to happen and why it happened too.
Nope, I'm here to see the replication of the experiment that we watched. Interesting enough to do it again. If we can make that happen again and actually show some weight loss, and I can validate your test setup as a calibration technician with 8.5 years of industry experience, then we can actually get somewhere with this.
Okay, I can promise you it worked.
Well, I can promise you I will be able to tell you if you have introduced error in your system and where.
Okay, I will gladly take that mantle, but I stick by my results. But I'm not sure it was dynamic nuclear orientation. It might have just been microwave conjugation because it was frequency related.
Yeah, the idea is that you got more than a gram of force change. Did you not? Or
The sample was pretty small.
oh, that's right. No, it wasn't
the
that
calculations were done in the end. I think it was like a 1.87 gram cycle, and we lost 18%. So we're talking on the order of like half a gram.
Yeah, that's right. It was a small sample because this can get
It was a very
It's a large enough change though that it was stable enough where we could be.
and it was repeatable over and over again at a specific frequency, and
Yeah, that was really interesting. I mean, the measurement apparatus that's actually taking those weight changes, it needs to be separated significantly farther to validate the results that you received previously. But if it is separated sufficiently far, and you already did an adequate job, in my opinion, of shielding to the best of your ability with the materials that you had,
right,
then that's what we're really going to find out. If those results still show up when all the other possible error-contributing systems have been eliminated out or solved, then we're going to see results there. It's something very solid to look into.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There were many people that helped me out with this, and we'll put their names in the comments as soon as their theory is vindicated. But right now, we have several different theories as to why it would work, and we're just trying to figure out if there's any other tricks to make it work. Different waveguide shapes. We actually 3D printed a waveguide that we're in the middle of building. You wanna show it to them?
Yeah, that is pretty nifty. Let me just hand you the pieces so you can show them what your hand-built 3D printer pumped out.
Okay, so basically we're making a waveguide. We intentionally made it with several different pieces in order to make very smooth edges. Basically what we're doing is we're splitting the RF in two. This is all going to be covered in aluminum, of course. We're splitting the RF in two symmetrical lines, tubes, which are the same size as the output. And then we're going to bring them around and basically hit them at each other at a 90-degree angle. And hopefully there should be some sort of interaction that happens over here. We'll see what happens with this waveguide. It's something that I'm pretty excited about. It may create just a more intense, dynamic nuclear orientation field. I've never seen a spacecraft, or never heard of a flying saucer that had one of these shaped waveguides on them. But
at least not on the outside.
Not on the outside. Actually, Bobblezar did mention some.
Well, waveguides are necessary for his system.
He did mention, that there were some waveguides, and he said they looked similar to microwave waveguides, but they told him that it was gravity waveguides, which leads me to believe that they were giving him a bullshit explanation to a real craft.
Whatever the case is, it's not untenable that you could use microwave energy to exert forces on materials, and the question of what those materials do when unusual forces are exerted upon them under the influence of other external fields that we don't know yet. There are field interactions that we're looking for that may yet be unknown. Field interactions between electromagnetism and gravity, which is still so highly sought after, and other possibilities of the carrier of mass, and a variety of other theories which currently exist out there as unanswerable. You can look up what mass is right now and get a nice textbook definition that tells you what it does and how it acts, but not what causes it or why matter has it. So at this point, we still don't have an absolute explanation of mass, and the Higgs boson is only a tiny piece of that equation. So
the best answer
it's not been solved yet, not even close.
The best answer I've ever heard from scientists is I don't know, but I have an experiment that can prove one way or another.
Well,
that's my
we can certainly
answer.
prove that we don't know. That's not hard to do, because we aren't in a flying craft yet. But I'm not too concerned about whether or not we know. I'm just concerned about whether or not if I have an input A and I jam it into the system, I get an output B that I expected. And if that input A happens to be 10 kilowatts of pulsed energy and output B happens to be a weightless craft, then I don't really care what the theory is on the intermingling between those two sides, as long as
You
the
understand how to
input
affect
equals
it.
output.
So long as we understand the effect and how to manipulate it, the math is really secondary. I mean, you know, the math can help guide, you know, how to build the waveguides and how to do. That's extremely complex math too.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to know if a battery lights up a light bulb, you don't have to understand exactly what the voltage of the battery is or exactly what the resistance of the light bulb is, nor what the filament is made of. If you want to know if, not how much, a battery lights up a light bulb, all you need to do is connect the battery to a light bulb and see if it lights up, and that's pretty straightforward. And then you can go ahead, if you want to build a light bulb that's better than the one you're testing, and do all the math. But first, you need to see if your battery lights a light bulb. And a lot of this stuff is still in those stages where we need to see if EM energy plus laminar magnetic field plus aligned electron spins can possibly equal the production of a yet misunderstood or not understood production of force or other anomalous effects. It's entirely possible, in fact, entirely plausible based on the observations.
Exactly, and that's what we hope to discover with our experiments.
I'd say that just about covers everything.
Yeah, pretty much covers everything, guys. Thank you very much for watching.
Take it easy.
Gute Nacht. Laila Tov.
Good night. Time for me to get in the shower, I think, and get to sleep.
Oh yeah. I just realized after we started that I didn't put the audio on the highest quality thing, but
Oh well.